The way we got Roastar started was looking at and discovering who coffee roasters were and what their problems were.
You're going to get unmatched, legendary customer experience here from start to finish.
Roastar has evolved a ton over the last few years. We've invested in new equipment and technologies. We have really put a lot of effort into continuous improvement out on the shop floor.
What I'm most proud of with Roastar is I love how they seek cutting-edge technology.
We also make things that are really cool for really cool customers too.
We're really interested in getting to know our customer and discovering what we can do to help them out.
I'm the host of the Coffee People and Coffee Smarter podcasts, Ryan Woldt. We don't do advertisements during our episodes, and that is thanks to the support we receive from Roastar Coffee Packaging. Please check them out at roastar.com. That link in the show notes or in our newsletter. And now, on to the show.
I think I'm all set. Yeah. Get into it.
Good, I'm glad.
Yeah.
I'm excited too. I have been sitting here in this closet since my last interview, just waiting for the next one. That's kind of how that works out. Hey there, everyone. Welcome to the Coffee People podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Woldt. The show is presented by Roastar Coffee Packaging. You can find them online at roastar.com. This show, the Coffee People podcast, is part of our Roast West Coast network. You can go to roastwestcoast.com to find recaps of this episode, other shows, Coffee Smarter podcast, so much more. And if you haven't poured yourself a cup of coffee, now's the time. Excuse me. Our guest today is Maggie Iannuzzi. Did I say that right, Maggie?
Maggie Iannuzzi.
Iannuzzi, the owner, co-owner of Precipice Coffee in Ellsworth, Maine. You can find Precipice online at precipicecoffee.com. And of course, we'll have those links in our show notes and everywhere that we send this out to. Maggie, welcome to the Coffee People podcast. How are you today?
I'm good. I'm so happy to be here, Ryan. Thank you for having us.
You are welcome. I mentioned co-owner, but can we shout out your fellow Precipice Coffee partner?
Of course, absolutely. Yes. Bill is roasting right now, and the sound quality during that process is probably not ideal, but he wishes he could be with us too. Bill Iannuzzi is my husband, roaster for our business, and kind of general operations manager. And yeah, we're happy to be here.
I'm glad to hear it, and we wish Bill well wherever he might be roasting. But it makes it easier for us to talk about him here on the show today.
Exactly.
I think we should just get started, though, with you. And I'd love to know a little bit more about you, kind of in particular, if you have any memories of coffee earlier in your life that you remember that stood out or that made you think, oh, this is kind of interesting.
I actually the industry when I was 14, via my first job, pouring, drip cups of coffee at Yum Yum Donuts in the Pennsylvania, Philly suburbs where I grew up. And then in high school, I actually worked at a small local coffee roaster in my hometown. So this was in 2004. So I would guess early days of micro roasting. They had the small gas drum roaster right up in the front in the cafe. And a woman named Sharon owned the business. So she would roast all the coffee. We would do flavored coffees. So we would pump our little syrups into the beans and mix them up.
Of course.
We had, all the flavors you could imagine, but we made espresso drinks there. So yeah, I was working an espresso machine from a young age, making drinks, helping roast the beans. I remember the big sacks of the green beans in the back room and, that smell of the burlap and that, specific kind of papery green coffee smell that they hold. So yeah, I've been in the game for a long time, for kind of a front of the house perspective in coffee. And just kind of worked in hospitality all from there, but definitely had early days of coffee roasting in my background.
Did you at any point try to get out, to say, hey, this, I'm going to go off into the world. I'm going to start a new career or do a new thing or whatever it might be. And if so, what was, the goal there and what brought you back?
So yeah, I worked in, hospitality through my whole career, working my way, serving, bartending, up to beverage manager for a restaurant group in Philadelphia, where I was kind of spotted by a local brewery. So I ended up working as a craft beer salesperson for a small local brewery. Then I worked for Heineken for a while. I worked for a couple national craft breweries, and that really led me into kind of the beverage sector overall as far as sales go. Then, Bill had been roasting coffee through that time. He started working for some small micro roasteries, working his way up in that industry in Philadelphia. And the pandemic happened, and I watched him. The last company he worked for was in Washington, D.C., and they were kind of focused more on supplying nitro cold brew via kegs to WeWorks throughout the country. That was their specialty. And during the pandemic, obviously that changed a lot for him. It changed my job a lot too. And seeing him help them pivot from this very specific model to more of a direct to consumer sales model was really inspiring to me. His production force went from like, I think there were like 15 guys working in the warehouse from roasting to brewing and packaging, just to him and one other person. So just seeing just him like bounce back on his feet and really help them navigate this like insane time and transition made me think, maybe we could do this for ourselves. So, that's kind of what brought me back into it, was kind of poking and prodding Bill to feel confident that he could manage a whole kind of business side of things on his own. And yeah, so I manage our sales for the business. Bill does all the production, and it's, yeah, been great so far. Beverage sales, beverage production worked out.
How did you get to where you are now in Ellsworth in Maine? It's a bit of a hike from Pennsylvania.
Hmm.
I lived in Pennsylvania for a bit, a little bit familiar with that world. Uh,
Nice.
and so, what brought you to this, what is admittedly a small town in the Northeast, to start this business? So, because not only are you then jumping into running your own company or your own business, you're moving.
So yeah, we had kind of jumped the ship. Bill's from South Jersey. We're both from the Philly suburbs. And so when we moved to Washington, D.C. for Bill's coffee roasting career, we, jumped ship, kind of left home. We're kind of experiencing that and realized, okay, we want to start a business for ourselves. Going back home is not necessarily what we were looking to do, but the DMV it's an expensive proposition when it comes to the whole world of business ownership and property ownership. It seemed pretty a far reach there. Bill and I had been coming up to Acadia for our whole relationship. A few of his friends brought him up to Maine for the first time when he was in high school, and then inevitably his family started coming up here every summer. So we would come up every year to Acadia, and it kind of just, Bill really introduced me to hiking. And I feel like I am a Pisces, I'm a water person. And so, there's just a really special magic about this area, how like the pine trees and the mountains kind of meeting the sea. It's really magical. So I think once you get here, once you experience Maine and Down East Maine and Acadia, like it really gets in people. It sticks with you, and it really infiltrates your soul in a way. And so we thought this could be a great place for us to start a business. I had noticed at the time maybe a lane for the kind of business that I wanted to run. And so we all, stuck at home during COVID, thought looking at Zillow, seeing what options were there in this area. And actually, the property where we ended up in Ellsworth, the previous owner had built an outbuilding we're at downtown. So we're in a small town, but we're right in the downtown. But she had built an outbuilding on her property to operate like a bakery business that she would bake in the house and sell out of the building. And so I saw that and I thought, okay. Let me do a little more research. So I started understanding there's a term cottage law, which is very important to Mainers because it allows people to operate lots of different businesses from home. It's we're not alone as kind of a home business with a secondary building that we sell out of. It's pretty common here, and so learned more about that, kind of started to understand what we would need to do to roast coffee in there. Talked a lot to the city as well to try and see if this was a valuable investment for us, as far as, like you said, not only just starting a business, but uprooting our lives. And yeah, as I started talking with them, they pointed out there is another company that roasts coffee in town, and it's a gastrum roaster. And there may have been some complaints over the past few decades. They've been here forever about the smell, and neighbors saying, "What is the smell?" And so I thought, oh yeah, maybe that could be a problem being in downtown. We're in the midst of all other homes in like a dual zoned area, and so that led me to discover the bellwether, which, it was only invented and put on the market in 2019. So it was new to the market. It was already kind of winning these SEA awards about, new kind of technology for the coffee industry. There was no one roasting up here on a bellwether. And, we moved here because of our love for the outdoors. That's what brought us here. And, to be able to kind of sync our passion for the outdoors in the sense of preservation and conservation, which is just like a huge thing for our community in here in the Acadia region, with our kind of life's work in coffee roasting and in the beverage industry. It all seemed to be really kismet. Like it all just kind of came together. So yeah, that's pretty much the tale of what brought us up to Maine. Yeah, it was just kind of timing and just that kind of magic that life sometimes has, I think, is the only way I can explain it.
I would point out to anyone listening, cottage laws are in 49 out of 50 states for running businesses out of your home, but they are a little bit different in every state. So make sure that you know what the rules are where you are. Sometimes they're different even by like county or town. They'll have little caveats out of their rules. So just throwing that out there for anyone listening. If you're Googling cottage law, make sure you're specific about it. You just mentioned the bellwether, which was, of course, my next question: how you found it, how you chose it. And you mentioned conservation and your love for nature as part of that. And for anyone who doesn't know, the bellwether is a zero emission solar electric machine that can run on solar power. You find that machine, but like you said, it's relatively new. We had Ricardo Lopez, the founder of Bellwether, on the show a while back. Uh, what made you confident in your husband, Bill, being in coffee already, familiar with the industry? What made you guys confident that this could handle what it is that you wanted to do with it and would roast a product that was at the quality you wanted?
Yeah, as we were investigating the bellwether, they helped us feel confident from kind of their sales side. They sent us a bunch of any samples we wanted, so we got to taste the coffee. We got to cup it at home in Alexandria before we moved here, as we were putting our thoughts together and our business plan together. We were really impressed with the marketplace that they were offering for green coffee. But Bill also has worked in sourcing green coffee. He worked for a small importer in probably 2018, 2017, 2018. So, we knew that we'd feel confident, it was a good place where we could start our business. The fact that they offered some amazing coffees, it really simplified getting started, which was amazing. And then, they also put us on a call with a few different businesses that were operating bellwethers. One was, in Michigan. They were pretty much a wholesale and online business. They didn't have any retail space. One was a bakery in New York that was running, using the bellwether in a small way compared to all the other revenue streams of their business with baking. And then the other was a cafe that was using it to power their cafe. And so, we kind of got all these different perspectives and like different narratives of feedback about how the bellwether supported different types of businesses. And Yeah, my confidence was pretty much secured there. I feel like, Bill roasted on, his first roaster he used was probably, I guess a 12 kilogram Diedrich. I don't remember the exact size, but kind of a 6 to 12 pound Diedrich roaster. And then at his job in DC, they were dumping the whole sack in. So, you know, he definitely has a ton of experience. So, they do bill this machine as something that is super user friendly for someone that doesn't have coffee roasting experience. And I can agree that anyone can hop on and press the buttons to get roasts going and everything like that. But just because there are different operations inside of the machine than a traditional gas drum roaster, but a lot of it is the same. So, he's used to being very cognizant of every little sound, every, little difference to feel like, huh, maybe something's not quite right. Or he's also confident to, like, go in there cleaning the machine and doing some tasks ourselves because of his experience and his confidence, at a roaster. So just, going into it, knowing we had that background, as well as, yeah, just getting tons of information from Bellwether made us confident to take the plunge and use it for our business. So,
You mentioned concern from neighbors about the smell of a previous roaster or noise or whatever there might be. I would
mhm.
point out that the one thing that's really unique about the Bellwether is the no emissions. It kind of keeps all that internally, and you're not necessarily having to start installing a full emission system, exhaust system, which in a very small business, and cottage laws generally have limits to the size that your business can grow, if I'm not mistaken. Um,
Yeah, luckily in Maine, we don't have size limitations as far as that goes, but there are certainly certain products that you can and can't produce at home. We're lucky because we do have this outbuilding. So, our whole property is under our license if we wanted to take it to the basement or something. Um, but yeah, the fact that the Bellwether, we have no natural gas or propane at all on our property. In Maine, we are in a rural part of Maine where I grew up, there's natural gas lines everywhere. You don't really think about it. But here, you'd have to install a propane system. That's a huge other additional cost that we were able to avoid by using the Bellwether. And then, getting that refilled, I mean, they come on automatically, like they keep coming and refilling it. So, it's the systematically different than what I'm used to growing up. So it was great to be able to avoid all of that. People do ask about, like, the cost of the machine versus traditional, and it's like, we were able to avoid a lot of costs by using it. And overall, I think we probably saved money. And now that we are solar powered, we definitely save money by going fully electric for our business.
I'm curious about that community then. Is this something that the community cares about? Obviously, you care about, being more environmentally friendly or more aware of your impact and
Mhm.
your community, your ruralness kind of demands it to some extent. But does the rest of the community care, or do they just say, "Oh, we like the coffee," or "We don't like the coffee"? I'm assuming they like the coffee, but that's good enough for us. Does this add to the story, or is it just kind of like a bonus to your story?
I think that there's a mix for sure. I think as far as, like, kind of third wave coffee goes in our direct town, there were a lot of people waiting for someone to make them a really good latte, kind of have a great cold brew and have consistent coffee that's, especially with our light roasts or medium roasts that, that just didn't exist. I mean, natural processed coffee, we are blowing minds with that category here, which is amazing. But I will say, from a marketing standpoint, and that to say, we have tons of customers that come because they are conscious of emissions. They drive an electric car. It- or they just haven't bought a new car since 1970. We have tons of those type of customers here in our area. And so I do think that, not to mention, we get a 4 million person influx every year that for people going to Acadia National Park. We're 15 miles from the park entrance where we live. So, and you kind of have to pass by Precipice Coffee to get to Acadia. So, Yeah, we get a mix of that, and then I will say, I it was maybe like a little easier for me to get in and break into the market as a new business here because I was able to point out to buyers from a wholesale perspective, like what sets us apart. I think that, of course, every other coffee roaster before people using electric were on the same machine. So it's style machine, more or less. So it's something that buyers weren't really even conscious of or thinking about in any way. And I think that, I was able to kind of build out a unique lane for us that was we didn't have a hard time infiltrating the accounts. Like, our co-op grocery stores, we're in every co-op grocery store in Maine basically because, you know, it's something unique. There's something besides. I don't, consumers are only so knowledgeable on individual origins or what to expect from specific roasts. I think that the general consumer, they see something that they didn't think of. Oh, it's zero emission, solar powered, and that's on the packaging. And so I think it's helped us with our momentum, across the board, I think.
Are you primarily wholesale? I know you mentioned the outbuilding, and I know you have limited retail and people driving by. But was that the goal from the beginning? Was to be more of a wholesale operation, or is there a bigger plan here? Has it turned out into what you imagined when you were looking at Zillow and thinking about this?
Yeah. We actually do pretty much half of our business. We do almost equal parts wholesale and retail. Of course, our retail includes more than just the beans. And so when you're looking at bean sales, we are weighted more in wholesale, as far as volume goes. And that was part of the goal. We have I call it the tiny shop. So we have our small retail space. But then we also do 3 farmers markets in the area. So, we do have this, and we ran a cafe last year on Mount Desert Island, essentially like tucked in Acadia. So, and we're sorting out how we want to manage our retail business this year. Staffing is a challenge across the country, but we don't have many people that live here, so staffing is definitely a unique challenge when you're in a rural market. We're sorting out how we want to grow as far as retail goes. But our plan was to do a lot of wholesale. I mean, I think that also allows us to have a little bit of diversity in the schedule, which we appreciate. When you are running that cafe 7 days a week, even if you have the best staff on earth that you trust, I think it still is a 24/7 job. And, I know that from my restaurant background. I don't know that I want to run a restaurant, so we love the farmers markets are a fabulous retail outlet for us. Of course, being, kind of in the eco-friendly sector, we fit in really well. But then we source almost all local ingredients for our baking side of our business. And so, yeah, we were well suited for the markets, and it's great to be outside in the summer in coastal Maine. So,
I hate to be a Debbie Downer this morning, but there's quite a few people who were working in national parks looking for jobs, and perhaps would like to stay in those regions. It might be an influx into
absolutely.
this industry, and state forest as well, national forest as well.
Yep.
Where does the name? Speaking of the outdoors, where does the name come from? How did you guys decide this is the brand we want to represent? Bill and Maggie, because you could have just been like, "This is Bill and Maggie's coffee company."
Absolutely. Of course. Yeah, we could have done that. Yeah, well, just to add to your comment, we have a lot of our close friends and customers work for the National Park Service. I think that, as far as like a demographic goes, they're totally aligned with our brand and they support us so much. And just hearing from friends about, there's people that were in, kind of probationary periods of hiring where they were hired in the past year or two. They were all let go. Also, because of the seasonality of Acadia National Park, it sounds like there's a lot of concern that they won't be able to hire seasonal employees this year, and that's going to impact so much, and that can lead into, the name of our business. There's kind of the most, I would say, iconic with the most lore in Acadia. The trail is called the Precipice Trail, and it does go up the precipice of Champlain Mountain. It's kind of iconic because it's got metal rungs built into the trail. So you're essentially like hiking slash jungle gym climbing. And people love it, myself included. I think that really like opened my eyes to hiking. Just it's just something so unique that you don't see on every trail or in every park. And so yeah, so being that we also are using the bellwether, and our goal was always to operate with solar, and that is something that's unique, not to be too corny about it, but like we really did feel like we would be on the precipice of something new. And when we talk to business owners here, people we in conversation, I push everyone to use a bellwether because I just think that, if you want to roast coffee for yourself, why would you not go this way when it's available to you? So kind of a dual thing. We're named after a famous trail in the park. And like I said, Acadia is a huge part of our relationship. We're a white husband and wife business, and it's a huge part of our love story, to be quite frank. Is
Well, that's
coming up
a
here. Yeah.
yeah. You work together, you play
Hmm.
together, you live together, you do it all on the same property. It sounds like.
We do. Yep.
How does that impact your life? I mean, you have to kind of like each other too, then. I mean, that's got to be
Yeah.
part of it, I would assume. But how did you develop your roles in the business versus your personal life?
Yeah,
Is there a
that
difference?
yeah, that's hard to say. I won't say there's clear lines. We do try, and I will say, owning a business it's a lifestyle. I think we maybe are still trying to figure out a better way to separate that time. We sometimes have our best like meetings and meetings of the mind like while out hiking because, you're just in that clarity and you're just, your heart's pumping, your blood is flowing and, maybe those thoughts kind of come to the surface better. But, we just try and find some separation, like, trying not to keep the work email on my personal cell phone, like little things like that that just help you like when you do find those moments to stay in the moment. But yeah, we like each other. We get along well. And I just think that we both have a lot of experience in the roles that we bring to the business. And so because of that, we both take a lot of ownership of the roles that we inhabit in this kind of ecosystem that we've built. So I don't expect Bill to go. I kind of run our shop, and I'm in charge of however that is going to grow. That's in my wheelhouse. And I don't expect Bill to be out interviewing a barista. I don't expect him to do anything like that. And he doesn't expect me when an order comes in to jump out and go start bagging up an order. It's so I think that we both have some unspoken respect for what each other does and just I guess respect for each other in general. It's not the easiest thing, I guess, always for every couple, but we found I think that kind of that kind of niche for each other. And yeah, we like hanging out, so we hang out. It's not also super serious too, so you know we have fun with it.
You're Ellsworth, as you mentioned, a smaller community. I think there's a little bit of pressure that comes with opening a coffee business in a smaller community. I think that there's only so many businesses to go around. You guys coming from the outside, how has Ellsworth welcomed you? Do you feel that there's any sort of pressure to be that cafe and that retail coffee spot? I mean, where do you guys fit in this new community?
So yeah, when we first moved here, I kind of took it upon myself. We're getting the business open. I took it upon myself to kind of get involved in the community. We joined our chamber of commerce. We also joined our kind of downtown association. It's called the Heart of Ellsworth. So I'm a board member for the Heart of Ellsworth, and I kind of just like jumped right in. We had been here enough that we had some understanding of like a demand for what we do in the community. Like I said, there's a great, everyday cafe that uses like a bigger size roaster, but a main roaster. And then we have a coffee roaster, it's a great store. It's an amazing store. It's a kitchen and fine goods store that also roasts coffee, and they've been doing it since like 1985. So, there's a demand for coffee. People are already coming to Ellsworth to get coffee. And so, definitely there's more competition now than there was when we moved here. And like, that's just how the cookie crumbles. As far as our greater region, more people are kind of roasting for themselves. It seems like a couple cafes we'd worked with in the past are transitioning to roasting for themselves, which is great. I think there's definitely like a DIY spirit here. That's like a big part of the Maine culture is, doing things yourself. So, yeah, I think that the community has accepted us. I mean, we have a great network of Mainer customers, and that term is used to explain people who were born here for like a few generations. But then because of the national park, and we have a few like, there's a big research laboratory that has a couple of locations in our area that draws a lot of workers from all over the country. And so there are a lot of transplants here as well. Of course, the park draws people. Oh, I'm a teacher. Maybe I should go teach and live in Acadia. So we get a lot of that. And so I think that, a lot of people are looking for something a little more familiar, maybe to where they came from, and they seem to find that in us and what we offer. So yeah, I mean, like I said, I think getting involved when you're starting a business, if I'm like giving anyone advice of, doing this somewhere where you don't know everybody, it's just, volunteering your time, I think goes a really long way.
Are there concerns? Have you guys already discussed how impacts to the national park system nationally are going to affect tourism? I mean, is that a topic of conversation among business people in your area?
I think it's just beginning to be. I think that, as the political landscape has been shifting very swiftly, um,
What are you
all of a
talking
sudden
about?
we're like, all of a sudden we're like, oh, wait, if there's not, there's in Acadia, there's many different areas you can hike where you don't have to go through kind of like a checkpoint for a park pass, but there's like kind of that main entrance where you're going to see the key sites of the national park. You do go through in your car, you drive through, and in summers past, the lines with COVID, especially where people were limited traveling, whether it be like in the country or definitely out of the country, we did see a huge tick in visitors. And so, we're wondering now when that line gets longer and longer because there's not enough staff, how does that impact the tourist experience? Yeah, it's something that I think we're just starting to really think about, and it's starting to sink in. So, I think Acadia is for the kind of greater Northeast corridor between like DC and Boston. It is kind of the one of the places you can go to really get away. And you can, and by car, you can pack the family in and drive, and there's tons of free stuff to do because you can just be outside and you're having a blast. So I do think we'll be okay, but it's certainly something to consider, and like didn't expect to have to consider, but seems as though those conversations will be happening more and more, I assume.
You mentioned, advice, people getting involved. I'm wondering if there's anything else, if somebody were to say, I want to get involved in coffee or I want to start a business of my own, anything that you would offer up and say, well, this is something I've learned along the way or a piece of advice that I've heard and I'd like to share.
I think the most value, it's very simple, and I do give this advice freely. But starting my business plan and working with the Small Business Development Center here in Maine um, was the most helpful way to figure out all the things that had to get done to start the business. I know it sounds silly, but I would say like put the chat GBT away, sit down with a state sanctioned template. It's going to include like all the categories. It was a template for like a movie theater, but it included everything that one would need to start the business. And I think that really helped as a checklist, as well as like, you're starting to plug those numbers and those thoughts together. And, inevitably, it was a really good guide to decide if this was viable or not. And yeah, so I definitely think just being really thoughtful and putting the time into starting a business plan is a great way to start any business. When it comes to coffee, I just think, passion is obviously really important, but I would, if you want to work in coffee, I would say if you have one day a week that's available, maybe go see if your local roaster needs any help. Maybe go see if your local cafe could use a hand during the rush on a Saturday morning. I would guess they'll say yes, you know, even if it's for like a stage style or just like, over the summer or, maybe the winter when you have more time in your schedule as people do up here. I think that's the best way is to just immerse yourself in whatever way makes the most sense for you. Because there's a lot to learn. There's a lot of layers to this industry, considering, our sole ingredient can't be grown anywhere near where we live. Um, there's a lot, and I think it's important to, I think that would be a good way to get into it.
I have a vision of the future where we're growing coffee underground. It sounds like it's just kind of a random thought, but like with advances in technology, I'm not saying it's going to be great, but I can see a future where things get erratic enough that we're like, we just need to control the environment to a certain extent.
Yeah, I can see something like that too. I mean, with just developments in like hydroponic growing, and I feel like, just indoor growing in general. Yeah, I wonder that too. That would be interesting. We
Uh,
shall see as a global kind of, it's such a global commodity. So, I'm not saying that I advocate for that, but, there's a lot of, as far as like being a business, it's really hard for me sometimes to tout being like this eco-friendly business. I struggle with like this like greenwashing like demon that sits on one shoulder. I really struggle when I'm, approached as your business is the most eco-friendly business to purchase coffee from in Maine. It's tough because, there's just so many uncontrollable elements to it that are arguably really bad for the environment. So being in coffee in general is probably not the route for an eco warrior. So, I definitely take everything with like a grain of salt when it comes to that, and try and be, at least try and not be like better than, or, I try and keep my ego in check, or just, all of that. But if we could grow coffee more locally, and my local farmers who are growing my tomatoes and my heads of lettuce are taking on coffee, I think that maybe wouldn't be the worst thing. I just, not to put anyone out of business in Colombia, or, you know, in Guatemala, they're producing amazing beans today. But
well, I
that's an
think
interesting
that
thought.
that future on a big scale, it's just there's so many variables. It's hard to navigate the threads as they keep spider webbing out. But what I can ask you is we're kind of coming down to the end of this chat. What does the future for Precipice hold? What does the future for you and Bill look like?
Yeah, I think that, as I said, it's tough to be like the eco person, but we really are. Our main goal is to build a sustainable ecosystem for ourselves. So, we at some point, it would be great to take on a second roaster, and so that we can continue to grow. That's probably the next step would be necessary. The bellwether is great for starting up a business. And it's also great because you can have two running side by side, but where will that be? Will it be, a different location, in the Acadia region, or will it be a little further south, closer to Portland, where is kind of our growth market of between 2024 and 2025 for wholesale? Or, will we just keep things as they are? Because, we're kind of chugging along here, learning every year. In our area, it's figuring out how to best survive the winter and how to pad yourself for that, like a little squirrel. So we're definitely big learning as we go with that, having better winters every season. So yeah, it really is just figuring out the harmony and the balance where we are running a business and we feel really proud of the success that we're doing and it's sustaining us. But also we still have time to go outside and go hike in the park. That's really important to us too. So yeah, that's our simple future, I guess, is
Oh, sure,
slightly
simple.
unknown.
No problem.
Slightly unknown, but with some some loose goals of growth, especially in the wholesale side, and just kind of continuing to nurture the retail side in the best way. So,
Anything that I didn't ask today that you really wanted people to know about what you guys are doing or about you?
I mean, I feel like you asked some really thoughtful questions that were, very based about the business, but also incorporated a lot of personal touches too. So I don't know. I can't think of a whole lot else. I'm just, yeah, advocating for new businesses to look into the bellwether when it comes to if you have experience roasting coffee or not. Those. I think I was talking on another interview recently, and we get these impact reports from Bellwether, and we've roasted about 60,000 pounds of coffee since we've been in business. And that the amount of carbon that we've saved is equal to 130,000 road miles by a fossil fuel powered vehicle. And so we've basically saved the lifespan of one passenger vehicle since starting Precipice Coffee. And so I definitely think that it's something that more business should look into if it's possible and explore it a little bit, see if it would be a good fit for you, just to control the controllables as best you can.
Last question then, Maggie. Let's just say you get into one of these gas-powered vehicles or an electric vehicle or a bicycle, and you're cruising down the road and you see someone else is opening a new coffee shop and you stop in. What are you going to order off the menu?
I'm a cold brew girl all year round, so I'm always going for cold brew. Give me a little splash of cow milk in there, and I'm good to go.
If you're drinking cold milk year round, you're going to need a little extra padding in the winter, I think. I'm just saying.
Yeah, yes. Well, this is New England after all, okay? We drink it ice all year.
Maggie, I really appreciate you being here. It's just been a real pleasure.
Yes. Oh, it's been so great talking to you. You're an amazing interviewer. I really appreciate your
Oh,
time.
well, most people don't know, but I drink before the interviews.
Oh,
Uh, just a splash or two. It doesn't matter what time of day. To everybody listening, you can find all the links that we've chatted about in today's episode, including the one to shop for precipicecoffee.com in our podcast show notes, in our newsletter found at roastwestcoast.com. The show is, of course, sponsored by Roastar Coffee Packaging. We really appreciate them. They enable us to continue sharing these stories of coffee people. If you'd like to find Coffee People, you can search for it. It's on YouTube, it's on Apple, it's on Spotify, it's everywhere. And we appreciate it if you like and subscribe and all that fun stuff. Thank you for listening to us share these stories, and tip your baristas and be sure to drink good coffee, everyone. Thanks for being here.
thank you.